We always have a blast chatting with our guests about all sorts of different topics, but sometimes we go off the rails and dig deeper into their automotive and motorsports pasts. As a bonus, let's go behind the scenes with this pit stop minisode for some extra content that didn't quite fit in the main episode. Sit back, enjoy, and remember to like, subscribe, and support Break Fix on Patreon.
They say that of cars too. Never drive your heroes. I've made that mistake several times. I do not recommend it.
That I don't understand. What do you mean?
So, for instance, celebrity cars. I've driven the Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am. I've driven an R5 Turbo. I've driven all sorts of things that you would see in a movie, all sorts of cars. And you're like, that isn't nearly as impressive as it looked like when it was on the big screen.
No, especially if it's a studio stunt car. They're all rigged for doing spins.
Exactly.
And, by the way, I have to voice, all my racing friends and I just couldn't stand the Ford versus Ferrari movie. It's a true story, and the acting was good. That wasn't the problem. But they were all driving 60 miles an hour on a track and talking to one another in a GT40, and I'm like, you can't do that. The windows are shut. It's loud as hell. I've driven an original GT40 around Summit Point in a vintage race, and you can't hear yourself scream. And the movie it was pathetic, the racing scenes. But other than that, it was a great movie for the story and the act.
I agree with you there. And it had a little dash of Fast and the Furious too, where it's like, how many times is he going to shift? And how long is a lap how long is the Mulsanne at Le Mans? It's like 20 minutes for him to get from one end to the other at 200 miles an hour. And then he suddenly downshifts and goes faster. I'm like, come on.
They never get it right in movies. They're so lazy and stupid in Hollywood.
Well, the alternative to that would be Steve McQueen's Le Mans, where it's almost too realistic and it's 3 hours of torture.
That was a docudrama.
Exactly.
And he could drive, whereas a lot of these actors, they can't fucking drive. You can't teach anyone that kind of stuff. And stunt driving is a little different from racing. And movies never get it right. As you know, you got to be there at the race or you got to be behind the wheel. It's like watching paint dry.
Exactly. Nobody wants to watch golf. Everybody wants to play golf.
Well, that only takes one ball. Racing takes two.
I like that. I'm going to use that. That's great. What's the difference between historical fiction and revisionist?
I don't believe science fiction exists. I believe that it all has a basis. In fact, some of it's pure fantasy, but not as much as people think. That's my personal thing. I'm merging the UFO disclosure movement topics and history and the history of the world and Atlantis and blah, blah, blah into the new book of World War II. And people will think, wow, this is a great fantasy thing, but it's more truth in it than people would ever suspect. I'm not telling people what to believe, but my foreword, I'll send you my foreword. I say, look, you can watch video footage of Foo Fighters. Everyone thinks that's a 1990s band. That was the name for UFOs in World War II.
A lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, nor does my cousin ever mention that shit. A lying liar. Lying to the American people. But what they're hiding is not funny. Whatever the truth is, and I think a lot of it really is true, because they've been hiding this tooth and nail. My father told me not to go down that road. You can watch my Daniel List interviews. I call a spade a spade. I mean, my father lied to me, but he did it to protect.
So your recent thing on history, is that with respect to the book or is that with respect to the UFO?
I'll send you the links.
Okay, cool. Very cool. As we kind of wrap up here, I have a couple other questions I want to ask just for fun, because you mentioned earlier Ford versus Ferrari and some of these other historical pieces. And there's been a recent influx of biopics or biopics, depending on how you want to use the inflection there. You weren't a big fan of Ford versus Ferrari, but what did you think of Rush?
Rush was good, I thought. I did a little bit of Formula Atlantic and Formula Ford early on in my youth. That is the most pure form of racing there is, open wheel. I was always afraid I was going to lose my leg. I wanted a car with a roll cage. I think I promised my parents that. I think somebody at Indy smashed into a wall, and you can build those tubs out of carbon fiber all day long. No way. And so I got out of that, but it was the most pure. Formula Atlantic was just unbelievably precise. So I liked Rush. I thought Rush was very good. I thought the original Grand Prix movie from 1964 was good.
Robert Wagner, right?
Yeah, and I thought that was very good. It showed, those guys died like rats in a drain pipe. The cruel sport. I thought, that was a good movie. Those are the only two I think I like.
In reality, and I know this sounds like, I'm meeting a celebrity or whatever, but I'm in awe of your history and this in the book. And like I said, reading this has been an inspiration, and it's kind of, been a kick in the balls to say, if you got an idea, just freaking do it. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, it came out of a time in my life where I just didn't have many options to work or do anything anymore. And I'd been just so used to the action and adrenaline. I think what you're doing is really interesting. I love to hear stories. And
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
Anton's a deeper story. It's more poignant than just racing history.
Absolutely. No, you've done a fantastic job.
The war starts, but the racing and the World War II and the propaganda and all that stuff, that's all real. Porsche did go on to build military parts and things at the Wolfsburg factory with slave labor. And it's sort of sexy history. A lot of people are turned off by Hitler and the Nazis, but there are more people that are very interested in that because it was just such, I'm learning new things about World War II every month that aren't told in the history books. And I have to dig out a Polish historian. It's that kind of thing. And I dovetail that stuff. So when B and the crew goes on into other books, they have that Porsche legacy. The new book, Porsche has an electric Kugelwagen. It's a prototype. He's got it with a solar cell for the Africa Corps, which makes perfect sense. And of course, if anyone was going to do an electric car, it would be Porsche.
Well, he was obsessed with it from an early age. Like the modern Porsche was all electric.
I'm sure during the war they tried that, but battery technology, I make it seem he's privy to classified batteries and stuff to make it work, but it's a prototype. And so there is a Porsche in the new book. Funny enough, there is a car. It's inside something else, this German anti-gravity airship. It's the emergency landing vehicle.
Nice. It's shuttlecraft. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it is. You land in the desert. What are you going to do? And of course, this thing is supplying a mining base in the desert. Porsche is in there with his engineering, but his tank, yeah, you're going to love that.
That's going to be awesome.
A hybrid electric Tiger tank. That's true.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, it didn't work quite well. And I wrote it broke down, but when it worked, it was brilliant. It would have been the better tank, but Hitler rushed everything into production like an idiot. Porsche went up to Hitler and said, the Soviets had this beautiful tank, the T-34, that they're rolling out by the thousands. Let's copy it. And he said, no way. We're doing a heavy tank with an 88 millimeter gun. Porsche couldn't believe it. He said, I'll copy the Russian tank. It's diesel. It won't blow up like our tanks are blowing up. No, that's true. Porsche recommended a Soviet tank. I mentioned it in the book. I had to cut out 3 chapters where Porsche actually went to Russia. They wanted him to be the automobile czar.
I do remember seeing that somewhere. Not in the book, but I remember reading that in history.
Yeah, they couldn't leave. Once they were there, they'd be paid well. But it was like one of his engineers went up to him and said, what's the point of being paid all this money if we can't leave Soviet Russia? You know they won't let us come back to Germany. And they said, fuck that. I believe it. He was offering them like the equivalent of millions of dollars. He was like, nope.
I know too much about French and British cars, not as much about Porsche history as I should, but hey, whatever.
One of my favorite cars, I had a 1986 Lotus Turbo Esprit. And it was
nice.
black with a tan interior. And I had been racing for 3 years, and I thought it was the best car. The engine didn't have a lot of torque, but the car was very lightweight. It was 2,800 pounds, whereas the compatible Ferrari 328 was 500 pounds more.
That was Chapman's thing. Add lightness, then power.
Lightness. And so I think the lotus flower, that goes back to ancient Egypt. It was sacred. It might have something to do with lightweight, the mystical nature of the lotus flower. Probably something like that. If Colin knew his Egyptian history, but it was very important to the Egyptians. They actually drank a tea of opium, lotus flower, and belladonna, and the priests would astral travel in the pyramids. Pyramids before. Anyway, it might have had something to do with that, but I liked Chapman's idea of lightness, and of course, you would just die today. You have to have so much safety gear. That car was really something. I had it for like 4 years. God, I used to drive around Manhattan, crazy, man. It was actually, the suspension was supple. What a great car. It's underrated. They weren't built very well, but they were great to drive. They handled
Absolutely.
It. So,
I've had the pleasure of driving several different kinds of Loti. They all put a smile on my face, and then I cringe afterward when I look at how they're made.
they were like kit cars, but he didn't care about that. He was like after performance.
Correct. Absolutely.
So you sacrifice luxury. The car had beautiful leather, but the switch gear and the shitty transmission was from a Peugeot or something, a Renault. God, that let it down. But other than that, it was brilliant. And the engine was good and strong. You had to rev the hell out of it, but it was great engine. I think they got 300 horsepower out of that four-cylinder after a while. That's a lot from 2.2 liters
Exactly.
back in the day. Today, it's no big deal. You can get a 1-liter car to have 1,000 horsepower, but it was difficult back in the late 80s.
You know what's funny, though, that I kind of strangely imagined in the book that, not that Porsche had buddies, he was kind of like a lone wolf in a lot of cases, right? I mean, you do a very good job
family, I think Adolf Rosenberger was his friend, but he was also a financier, and so.
But they were always at like arm's length. But
Bugatti was a friend.
Yes, but I also thought, because of Porsche's use of diesel, that in my head I imagined him sitting down in the book and discussing ideas with Rudolf Diesel, just like one of those kind of things. Like they would have been buddies.
I don't know when Rudolf died. He was French. He probably did. He saw the merit in it for trucks, not cars at the time, but trucks. But Bugatti was a fellow genius, and they really were friends in real life. One could only imagine the conversations.
Yeah, right.
So I write it that they're kind of like two bros, and they're like making fun of each other in sort of an offhand way. He calls Bugatti's cars ox carts, and Bugatti's called his trucks or whatever, but I can see that happening between two geniuses.
Yeah, exactly.
And Bugatti worked with him in Germany a long time back. They met in Germany. I can't remember if they were working for Mercedes or I think it was for somebody else, and they met. They were both engineers. They were young men. I can't remember when they met or where it was, but they discussed, back when I met you at such and such place, you were a grease hog, and you were an asshole, and they go back and forth with this. I like the banter between Bugatti and Porsche.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
And there's a scene in there where B goes to Bugatti. My editor said to take it out, and I said, fuck you. I'm not taking this out. So B in this real, you know who Wolf Barnetto is? Mm-hmm. The Bentley boys. Okay, well, he's in the book. He and B are friends. They become friends. Oh, yeah, fuck yeah. She drives a supercharged Bentley. Yeah. And that's a little bit onto Ian Fleming a little bit, but I have her drive a special with a Speed 6, not a 4-cylinder. It's a real hot rod. And she becomes friends with Wolf. Well, they go to Bugatti to convince him of this project that she's working on. I need to go to the Grossglockner. This is all fiction, but Porsche took his auto unions to the Grossglockner hill climb, as the Germans did every year for testing. She and Wolf Barnetto knew Bugatti, and her mother knew Bugatti. They're all chummy. Her mother drove a Bugatti. She's at school. So she goes up to Bugatti. When you read it, I love this chapter. And she's like, I need a Grand Prix car for the Grossglockner hill climb. It's got to have 600 horsepower, and I need it in a month. And Bugatti's like, what? Sorry, all our things are spoken for, and we don't build Grand Prix cars anymore. We're outclassed by the Germans. And she goes up to a picture on his shelf of him and Porsche at a racetrack, and she turns it to him and said, but just imagine Herr Bugatti, or whatever. What do they call him?
Monsieur.
No, they called Bugatti, I don't know, a name like Ferrari had. Like,
Commendatore. Yeah.
Something like that. And she goes, imagine wiping that smug look off Porsche's face when a French car and a French woman, she's going to pose as a French woman, blows his doors off at the Grossglockner hill climb. And Bugatti just dovetails to the next chapter, and Bugatti whisks the tarp off of this chassis, this Grand Prix car that he built. Actually, it's a real car. I got the chassis number that he built with a 5-liter engine. He turns to his engineer and says, you see that big supercharger over there? Let's bolt it on here with the bigger carburetor, up the compression and redo the cams and make the valves bigger. I need 600 horsepower. And the guy's like, yeah, we can do it.
Is that a nod to like the 57G tank?
Something like that. I have the chassis, and he built one 5-liter Grand Prix car for someone, and they either didn't use it or they did it in one race and they didn't use it anymore. They just couldn't compete with the Germans. But B goes up to him and says, of course, Wolf Barnetto bribes him, says, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell the press that, that story. He's putting the heat on him. And so they're both putting the heat on screws to Bugatti. He's like, what the fuck are you people doing in my office? Breathing my air. And they convince him to do it. And I think in real life, he would have done it. Maybe not a Grand Prix car to take on Nürburgring, but a hill climb car, overpowered. They were all overcranked superchargers. And the Germans were running 600 horse. And she says, I need 600 or better. And so they mixed exotic fuels in those days. hill climbs were, 10 minutes? They went up full power. So they could get away with non-standard fuels and no
And you mentioned that when Stuck talks about when the idiot guy filling the petrol spilled it on his neck and how it was burning him. Yeah.
It would burn the first 2 layers of skin off because there's nitrobenzene in it, and there's alcohol, and there's all these toxic chemicals. That's a true story. You can actually see some of the footage if you look up the auto union races on YouTube. Somebody gets splashed and turns around really furious. It would burn the drivers. Of course, when they wrecked, they went up like a fireball.
So the reason I brought up the 57G tank, I've seen it in person. It's up at the Simeone Foundation in Philadelphia. And that car has an interesting backstory, 100% related to World War II. It was the Bugatti race car at the time. It has that airfoil teardrop shape. It was a study in aerodynamics, but it was also a race car, not necessarily a Grand Prix car, though you probably could consider it back then. But because of all the turmoil and everything that was going on in Vichy, France, to protect that design, Ettore told all those guys to basically find a spot hidden and bury it underground. They almost forgot where it was and then unearthed it after the war. So that existing car is in Philadelphia.
What is this?
So I don't know planes as well as I know cars. So you're going to have to tell me what that is.
This is Bugatti's design for air racing plane.
No way.
Using 2 of his straight 8 Grand Prix engines with counter-rotating propellers.
That's really cool.
Wipe out the torque effect. But it's a very unusual and beautiful design, like a swallow.
That's awesome.
So imagine if the Germans copied this, and whose engine would power it?
Well, it'd be Porsche's engine over anybody else's.
That's little Anton.
Ah.
It's a Heinkel. High altitude interceptor. It's the fastest plane in the world in April of 1940.
So Little Anton is the code name for the plane?
It's his big brother. He nicknames the plane after his dead big brother.
Who was named after his father, Antonius Porsche, right?
Don't tell anybody that, but I'm spoiling it for you.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But I couldn't resist because Bugatti the story is, the Germans did have their eye on this plane. Oh boy, did they. Because air racing was basically fighter design.
Right.
And so Bugatti and his men in the factory, they hid it in a French farmhouse. It survived the war.
See, Bugatti's good at hiding stuff, apparently.
He did not want his technology going into German hands. The French Air Force was interested in it. War broke out. It was just in a shed and prototype stage. They had no time to test it. And the Germans rolled into France quick. And so there is a lot of truth to this German idea of stealing Bugatti's plane, but they make it bigger, and it houses one hell of a big cannon. And it's got some other tricks up its sleeve, but Porsche is tasked to design the biggest, most powerful engine in the world out of a classified alloy. Even though it's a 16-cylinder with twin superchargers and twin intercoolers, and it makes 3,000 horsepower, this is 1940. So that's a lot. That's twice as much. The biggest. It's lightweight because Bugatti, of course, lightweight, Porsche, lightweight. They both agreed on that principle. And so he says it. He's in the hangar with B and Lutz. I mean, it's a great chapter. The plane has massive power. It's an advanced design, but it is lightweight. And there's something on board that makes it even lighter. But I won't ruin that part for you.
So I'm just wondering, in historical truth, there's
a lot of truth behind it. The story, everyone think, he made it up, and Bugatti's racing plane was small and it wouldn't have worked. Oh no, the Germans, they built it with their strength and their other stuff, but they build it light and fast.
What I'm getting at is based on historical truth. I'm wondering if that's where the fascination that Porsche has always had with precious metals like magnesium come from.
Right. The fictional alloy, blue aluminum that I put in the book has also a basis. In fact, the Germans were ahead of everyone as far as the racing aluminum and alloys and stuff.
Metallurgy.
They were working on aircraft frame alloys that were stronger and lighter. So that's basis in truth as well. I'm going to get so many people on this. Porsche designed the Mercedes-Benz V12 601 aircraft engine. ME 109, the bombers, they all used it. He designed it before he left Mercedes. It was on a design board. That's in the book. He did design a big 16-cylinder engine for Mercedes, Flug Motoren Works. And there's a scene, it's in Mercedes. In fact, the aircraft fact. He did design a 16-cylinder, and it had twin superchargers. It never left the bent. And you have to have the book on the Mercedes aircraft engines of World War II to know it.
Wow.
Everyone's going to write me and say, they wouldn't have done that. Oh, no, they did. Now, it was for a bomber, not a fighter. Fighter's just a hot rod. You stick a big engine in a small airframe. It's the same thing as a car. Porsche cut his teeth on aircraft engines and cars. He was a dual genius in that area. He knew about aerodynamics enough. But, in the book, you'll see there's a U-boat section. The U-boat story has also a basis in fact, believe it or not. When you get to that, everyone's going to think, they think Little Anton is this U-boat. No, it's a misleading thing. I'm ruining the whole book for you. But
No. I don't mind.
There's so much in it doesn't matter. Porsche did work on some of the diesels for the Schnell boats, the PT boats. He had a hand in all that stuff. I think MAN, Maschine Anschluss and Maschine Fabrik.
Which is owned by Volkswagen. So
yeah. And he did have little pieces of that. And he was called in, we got a problem with this. And so his experimental engines on this U-boat, I thought it was very clever. I put the aftercoolers in the hull and they're chilled by seawater. And that's why he's got 3 big diesels in there and this U-boat can go 30 knots on the surface. And people will say, and then there's some other technology that seems like science fiction. But I'm telling you, between you and me, it's not. The Germans were working on free energy tooth and nail. Porsche didn't have anything to do with it. But in my new book, Walter Gerlach has everything to do with it. And they sort of merge. Porsche is not a physicist. Gerlach's not a mechanic, but they need each other.
Yeah.
Make this anti-gravity airship run. I find that very interesting. The gearheads will go crazy for it, but it gets into torsion fields and electromagnetism. But it's all based on real technology. I'm not kidding you.
That's awesome.
So when you read about that in the U-boat section, I debated whether or not I wanted to do it in this book, but I did it anyway. First of all, I wanted to distract the reader down a dead-end alley.
The little red herring. Yeah.
It is absolutely something they would have tested in a U-boat, and they probably did at the very end of the war. The Type 21 U-boat was this beautiful modern prototype of what we call the albacore tuna looking submarines that we'd still use today. It wasn't perfectly round, but it was very modern. And there's no evidence, but the historians I talked to, we're all in agreement they probably tried to shoehorn that thing in there because you don't need diesels. Run on electric motors all the time and unlimited range. And you can make your own oxygen and fresh water like they do today in the USS John Warner, Virginia-class attack submarine.
Must be nice to have a ship named after you, right?
It was only a matter of time. I said to Dad, it's only a matter of time before they have a weapon system with Warner on it. He's like, yeah.
We hope you enjoyed another awesome episode of Break Fix Podcast, brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved, be sure to follow us on all social media platforms at Grand Touring Motorsports. And if you'd like to learn more about the content of this episode, be sure to check out the follow-on article at gtmotorsports.org. We remain a commercial-free and no annual fees organization through our sponsors, but also through the generous support of our fans, families, and friends through Patreon. For as little as $2.50 a month, you can get access to more behind-the-scenes action, additional pit stop minisodes, and other VIP goodies, as well as keeping our team of creators fed on their strict diet of Fig Newtons, gummy bears, and Monster. So consider signing up for Patreon today at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. And remember, without you, none of this would be possible.